For WMUR TV, an ABC affiliate here in New Hampshire.
B-I-X-B-Y.
Yankee frugality is alive and well here in New Hampshire, and when it comes to numbers and crunching the dollar signs, this is the state where this type of a dialogue makes a lot of sense.
No one covers New Hampshire like we do. We're WMUR News 9.
Now at 5 o'clock, a live look at the skyline. Off the top of my head, it's the type of story that we'll probably put into the middle of the newscast, a red meat dialogue, something that will try to just bring some attention to what this effort is, what the tour is, and I'm sure it'll get some moderate play in the news.
And in other news tonight, man allegedly steals a diamond ring, then swallows it in front of police.
Our Heather Hamill is live in Hollis tonight with quite a bizarre story. Heather?
This $7,000 diamond engagement ring won't be going on anyone's finger anytime soon. Police say thanks to Kenny Narin.
Our federal financial problem is worse today than it was in 1992. But back then, the media, business leaders, along with Ross Perot and Paul Tsongas, made fiscal responsibility a key issue during the presidential campaign. The country woke up, recognized the challenge, and demanded change.
We come here today, Democrats and Republicans, to celebrate a true milestone for our nation. In a few moments, I will sign into law the first balanced budget in a generation.
The politics of sound fiscal policy are very difficult because the natural inertia in the political system, if you will, is toward federal programs, most of which are very useful. And therefore, the inertia is towards spending on the one hand and tax cuts on the other hand. But if you're going to have sound fiscal conditions, you have got to both constrain your spending and you also have to provide for adequate revenues. And what ultimately is involved are very difficult trade-off decisions involving federal programs and what the American people want their government to do, and then providing the means to pay for it. I left Treasury in July of 1999. In 1998, the federal government of the United States had a fiscal surplus for the first time in, roughly speaking, 30 years. And the projections forward, based on the fiscal policies then in place, were for continued surpluses for long, long into the future. And I thought that what had happened, well, I wouldn't say what I thought. What had happened was that a political coalescence had occurred or had developed around maintaining fiscal discipline, which is a very difficult thing to do politically because it requires spending constraint and adequate revenues. And I thought we were on that track.
It happened this week, something few of us thought we'd ever see. The national debt clock was turned off at noon last Thursday, having outlived its purpose. While the national debt has hardly disappeared, it stands somewhere in the $5 trillion range, it is slowly winding down, having dropped by over $100 billion since the first of the year.
Did you know millions of Americans live with debt they cannot control? That's why I developed this unique new program for managing your debt. It's called Don't Buy Stuff You Cannot Afford.
Oh, let me see that. If you don't have any money, you should not buy anything. Sounds interesting.
Sounds confusing.
I don't know, honey. This makes a lot of sense. There's a whole section here on how to buy expensive things using money you save.
Give me that. And where would you get this saved money?
How much money do you guys have in your savings accounts?
A couple $100.
About 1,000, maybe.
Are you talking about money-wise?
I end up using most of the money in my savings account, so it doesn't really, like, work as a savings account. Like, I'm not actually saving anything. I'm just storing it there.
I think most people can say that they live paycheck to paycheck. I think the good majority of us do.
David, we've got you right here. Robert, you're right over here, the introductions. This is Dean Board. How are you?
I'm David Yepsen, and I'm a political columnist with the Des Moines Register. The most important issue in the campaign is Iraq. But I think this issue is really the most important issue facing the country.
Okay, stand by, please. Up on camera 2. Go ahead.
Debt denial. Some see the nation ignoring a red ink tsunami. We'll question United States Comptroller General David Walker and Concord Coalition Public Policy Group Executive Director Robert Bixby on this edition of Iowa Press.
2019.
You talked about the national credit card being run up. What about the individual credit cards?
Too many Americans are following the bad example of their federal government. They're spending more money than they make. They're taking out home equity loans. They're charging up their credit cards. They're building up compound interest and seeing the day in the not-too-distant future where they may not be able to make the minimum
Does that exacerbate the national problem?
It clearly does, because for 2 years in a row, American households have spent more money than they took home. A negative savings rate. The last time that happened was 1933 and 1934. Not good years for America or the world. Now, we're in a very different situation than 1933 and 1934. But the reason we have to borrow from foreign players who hold more of our national mortgage, who have more leverage on us and we have less leverage on them, is because we're not saving, and that's got to change.
I think it's going to take a crisis before America responds to this. This is America. We don't do anything until something reaches a crisis, whether it's military rearmament before World War II or whether it's this question now. We're not going to be willing to take this pain until it gets to be a real problem.
The concepts of sacrificing and building for a better tomorrow have been pushed aside by our live for today, easy credit, and consumption-oriented society. Many Americans have never seen a rainy day and therefore simply choose not to save for one. This is a major problem because savings result in increased investment, additional research and development, a stronger economy, and an improvement in our overall standard of living. Is America's low savings rate today strictly a matter of personal choice, or are there also other forces at play here?
Dr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Greenspan. I understand that you did not take my friendly advice last fall. I thought maybe you should look for other employment, but I see you kept your job. Now, I'm pleased that you're back, though, because at least you remember the days of sound money.
In the early 70s, due to the breakdown of the monetary system, it excited me enough to want to speak out.
The concern a sound money economist has is for the supply of money. If you increase the supply of money, you have inflation. I know Wall Street likes it, and the economy likes it when the bubble's getting bigger, but I think it's harmful.
Inflation is very simple. When government arbitrarily, out of thin air, prints money, creates money and credit out of thin air. And when I talk to many teenagers, grade schoolers, they seem to have no problem comprehending the fact that if you just create a lot of money, it'll be like monopoly money and it won't have value.
Dr. Paul, you're raising an issue which a significant number of people have been raising over the years, and for which, frankly, we're not quite sure what the answers are.
Alan Greenspan was the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. I see the central bank, the Federal Reserve System, as having this tremendous power over money and credit. Greenspan, or any chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, is more powerful than even our president because he has so much control over the economy. Many countries have bitten the dust through the inflation, even in ancient times. This is a very serious problem, and the biggest fear will be that if the Fed creates too much money, we're going to have a crash of the dollar.
And for 3 years, you've never been once in the target range. You know, if I set my targets and I perform like that as a physician, my patient would die.
Is the gentleman finished? Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Paul. Mr. Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Because the value of your saved dollar can be impacted by the money supply, any talk of savings is incomplete without discussing the Fed. The Federal Reserve is the primary force in determining our nation's money supply. This is known as monetary policy, and it should not be confused with what is called fiscal policy, which relates to tax and spending policies set by the Congress. The Fed's two main policy goals are, first, to help stimulate economic growth, and second, to try to keep inflation low. These goals can conflict. When the Fed determines that the economy needs a stimulus, interest rates are lowered, borrowing becomes easier, and more money flows into the economy. This is known as opening the Fed window, and the result is an increase of the money supply. When inflation is rising, which means that the dollar is quickly losing value, the Fed raises interest rates, borrowing becomes more expensive, and money eventually flows out of the economy. This closing of the Fed window decreases the money supply. Severe inflation requires a very tight monetary policy, which often leads to increased unemployment and greater reliance on personal savings. In a worst-case scenario, the economy can become stagnant and inflation can increase, a situation called stagflation. The Fed is then faced with an extremely difficult choice because it can't raise interest rates and lower them at the same time. It must choose either to stimulate the economy or to fight inflation. This last happened in the 1970s, and it was a very difficult time for our country.
I was in the Nixon White House, first as an economic advisor to President Nixon, and then as Secretary of Commerce. Well, I think history will record that Federal Reserve was part of the problem. They let money supply get out of control. When Paul Volcker took over, he realized the need for tough action. But it's hard for many people to believe that interest rates were, as I recall, at the extraordinary level of 15 to 20% annually. And he had to take truly courageous action, and he did.
That's a book for you. Poor Richard's Almanac. It was an introduction by Paul A. Volcker. I recommend it to you at your nearest bookstore. I think one of the lessons of that period, and these lessons have to be learned and relearned, is don't let the inflation get started, because once it gets some momentum, it's kind of feeling that it's inevitable, we'll find ourselves back in the days of stagflation and unacceptable economic performance, and very difficult to deal with. And it's a little flavor of that at the moment.
This is an NBC News special report. All kinds of economic indicators turning south. New foreclosure stats out today and the like. Tim, these are tough times for the president to face the press.
He is hearing it from everybody in his own party, the opposition party, and from the American people. Prices are skyrocketing, and they're asking, what's the government going to do about it?
With respect to the fiscal crisis looming out there in the future, we'll see whether a democracy can deal with an obvious problem that's going to be present in not too many years, and the earlier we take action to deal with it, the better. The Paul Revere of America these days is David Walker, the Comptroller General, who is absolutely dedicated to the idea of bringing to the attention of the Congress and the American people the fiscal crisis is looming out there.
We've been to 21 states so far and the District of Columbia, and we expect to continue this through the 2008 election.
Before I came here, I was a high school business education teacher. I taught for 38 years. I'm very concerned about the federal debt. I think probably I'll survive, but I worry about my son and my grandchildren and the burden that it's going to place on them.
You know, I don't think that deficit reduction is going to be described as a sexy topic. It is hard to break through with an unsexy message that sort of comes across as kind of like taking a cold shower. It's kind of the, we come along after the sexy messages. Cool people off, I guess.
This is about the future of our country, our children, and our grandchildren. And ultimately, I'd like to think that politicians will rise above partisan politics to do what's right for our country.
Well, my parents were poor dirt farmers, and they obviously wanted better for their kids. Things should get better for each generation. My only child is a college graduate, and I hope my grandchildren are going to be college graduates, but I think it's harder and harder to attain that. For we who are the middle class, and the lower income people, we need help. We need help.
Our nation is entering a demographic transformation to an older society, and we're doing so with rising healthcare costs and falling national savings. And that's a very bad combination for the future health of the economy.
Priorities are totally screwed up in this country. You know, I'm not going to be around to see the disaster if it doesn't get better, but my kid and my grandkids are. And it scares me a lot.
In any event, the more money you have relative to the amount of goods, the more inflation you have, and that's not good. So
we're not a free market then? There is an invisible, there is a benevolent hand that touches us.
Absolutely. You're quite correct. To the extent that there is a central bank governing the amount of money in the system, that is not a free market, and most people call it regulation.
And so when you lower the interest rate and drive money to the stocks, that lowers the return people get on savings
Yes,
in a bank.
Indeed, yes, indeed.
So they've made a choice. We would like to favor those who invest in the stock market and not those who invest in a bank. That helps us.
No, that's the way it comes out, but that's not the way they think about it.
This is about Bernanke. This is about Bernanke. He has to be on that call. Forget the investors. The investors are going to do. If Bernanke Bernanke needs to open the discount window. That's how bad things are out there. Bernanke needs to focus on this. Alan Greenspan told everyone to take a teaser rate and then raise the rate 17 times. And Bernanke is being an academic. It is no time to be an academic. Listen, open the darn Fed window. He has no idea how bad it is out there. He has no idea. He has no idea.
Kramer.
I have talked to the heads of almost every single one of these firms in the last 72 hours, and he has no idea what it's like out there. None! My people have been in this game for 25 years, and they are losing their jobs, and these firms are going to go out of business, and he's nuts! They're nuts! They know nothing!
Kramer.
This is a different kind of market, and the Fed is asleep!
There are three types of people in our country: those who save and invest, those who could easily save more but choose not to, and those for whom savings is very difficult. If Federal Reserve policy creates strong economic growth and keeps inflation low, everyone can benefit. However, if inflation rises, people who are less well off will suffer more.
The Federal Reserve seeks solely to get as high a level of real material well-being as we can by setting a platform of stability. We cannot pick and choose amongst various areas of the population because we just have no means of doing that. If fiscal policy is lax or savings are exceptionally low, there is nothing monetary policy or any central bank can do about that. We cannot live in the present only. Human beings cannot survive unless they create provision for the future.
Americans must start to save again, and they need to invest those savings to help create a better future for themselves, their families, and our country. At the same time, Americans need to know that the money that they are saving will hold its value. Too much easy credit for too long can create a false sense of wealth. No one plays a more important role in all of this than the Federal Reserve.
I think I got it. I buy something I want and then hope that I can pay for it, right?
No. You make sure you have money, then you buy it.
Oh, then you buy it. But shouldn't you buy it before you have the money?
No.
Why not?
It's in the book. It's only 1 page long. The advice is priceless and the book is free.
Wow, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, we can put it on our credit card.
So get out of debt now. Write for your free copy of Don't Buy Stuff You Cannot Afford. And if you order now, you'll also receive Seriously. If you don't have the money, don't buy it.
When I say trade deficit, do you know what that means?
Deficit usually means something like disorder or something, so something is wrong with it. It's not good.
It's the money that the United States owes. Wait a minute.
I have no clue. Sorry.
I have no idea.
I think it's something along the lines of you've borrowed more than you've spent.
Is the trade deficit with other countries, maybe?
So if we have a trade deficit, we're importing more than we're exporting.
Okay, there it is.
In 2007, China had the largest trade surplus in the world. And who was dead last? The United States of America.
I've always liked business, I've always liked investments, I've always liked economics, but I'm a disaster. You know, if you ask me, you know, what happens to a split atom or what happens to a cell within a body. So different people are wired different ways. A few years ago, I wrote an article for Fortune on sort of the parable of Squandersville and Thriftsville, which was designed to simplify for people problems inherent in persistent and large trade imbalances. Economics tends to put people to sleep, and I thought maybe by creating a couple of islands with inhabitants of quite widely different activities that it might get across a point that otherwise they get lost on. The thrust is that if you own a lot of property, an island in this case, you can trade it off for the things that you eat and consume every day, and you can do that for a long time, but eventually you run out of property and then you have to work a whole lot harder to provide your own needs, but also to pay back for the debt you've incurred. Short-term actions have long-term consequences that sometimes people don't think about in the short run. In the last few decades, but accentuating in the last 6 or 8 years, this country has started consuming considerably more than it produces. Because we're so rich, we can do it for a long time, and we can do it on a large scale, but we can't do it forever. Eventually, you run out. I mean, it's like a credit card. My credit's pretty good at the moment, and if I want to go out and quit working and have no income coming in, but keep spending, I can, first of all, sell off the assets I have, and then after that, I can start borrowing on my credit card, and if I've got a good reputation, I can do that for quite a while. But at some point, I max out, and at that point, I have to start producing a whole lot more than I consume in order to clean up my debts. In this country, we have seen imports increase from 5% of GDP to, 17% or so of GDP in the last 35 or so years, and yet we have 4.5% unemployment, and we have a very, very prosperous country. So it's a good thing for us. What is not good is the imbalance between imports and exports. The rest of the world is buying more and more of our goods all the time, but at an even greater rate, we're buying more and more of theirs. That's not good. More trade overall is good as long as it's true trade. If it's pseudo-trade, where we're buying but not selling, I do not think that's good over time.
If you're buying more than you're selling, which is what a trade deficit is, eventually your trading partners are going to own a lot of your wealth. When they are not buying your goods and services with this money, they will be looking for ways to invest it. Running large and persistent trade imbalances can be problematic, especially when a country has a low savings rate and its government needs to borrow more money every year to pay its bills.
When the federal government needs to borrow money,
yeah,
do you know how they do that?